$80 billion that you just mentioned from the Inflation Reduction Act to increase the tax enforcement is targeted directly at those in the top 1%, well above.
So you're going to get all that money. The IRS is now under a directive. Go after the top one, and that's how we're going to get that. No, I just want to be clear. Is that where you're going to get the money, or are you saying that anyone less than the 1%?
So there are.
Please be clear. I'm asking a specific question.
I want to be clear.
That
so
you
just give me a
are
chance.
saying they will not be taxed more, scrutinized more by the IRS. Their deductions examined more by the IRS. They will not be scrutinized more. They will not be scrutinized more. They will not be taxed more if they're under $400,000. All right, that does sound like a read my lips moment here. And keep in mind, the CBO has already investigated this to say, at least in the first few years, $20 billion in higher taxes. The 400,000 and under crowd could be seeing. Be that as it may, we'll see how it all sorts out. Dave Dodson joins us right now, the Stanford School of Business. Francesca Chambers, the White House correspondent over at USA Today. Dave, to you first. How likely is that? What do you see happening, the impact of this move, this climate change, inflation reduction bill, whatever you want to call it, and that the 400,000 and under crowd will not be affected?
Well, it's sort of laughable to call it an Inflation Reduction Act because it has nothing to do with inflation. But in terms of taxes, I think it's pretty clear from all the work that I've seen that it's going to be fairly tax neutral for people under the age of 400, or people who make less than $400,000 a year. I've seen studies that are plus 100. I've seen studies that are minus 20. The issue with the IRS enforcement, though, is sort of absurd for someone to say that we are not targeting people, because the IRS, there's only two people in the IRS that are political appointees. Everyone else is a bureaucrat. So they can't say that the IRS is or is not targeting any one particular group.
You know, that's what I was trying to get to, Francesca, when I had Jared Bernstein on, this idea, if you're saying that you're not targeting the 400,000 and under crowd, when you say they will not be paying extra taxes, you are, in fact, exempting that crowd or saying that they will not be touched. So you kind of can't have it both ways. What do you think?
Neil, this is something Republicans are seizing on as they head toward the midterm elections. The NRCC chair, Tom Emmer, telling me yesterday that this is something that they will be focusing on, is this beefing up of IRS enforcement, and saying that that $80 billion that will go towards it, that it's certainly something that Republicans are saying that it could be going after the average American. Now, again, the White House saying that that's not what the money is for. That money is for going after tax cheats and also the billionaires. You're also looking at that corporate minimum tax that we've also seen too. That's what the money is for. But all that to be said, Neil, another key question is how much will companies try to pass this off onto consumers? There are some analyses out there that the money that corporations end up paying, they could try to pass that on to consumers and increase their costs, especially at the beginning of this bill taking effect.
You know, Professor, I'd like you to respond to this. Our Hillary Vaughn caught up with Joe Manchin, whose vote was crucial, made this whole package law about the inflationary impact and the chief selling point of this. This is from yesterday.
Is it misleading to call this the Inflation Reduction Act for Americans when it's not going to make their grocery bill cheaper? It's not going to make everyday goods cheaper for them.
Why would it? Well, immediately it's not, but we never seen anything happen immediately like today. It's turn the switch on and off.
All right, he might be stating the obvious now. Of course, this was billed as something that would reduce inflation. So let me ask you outright, Professor, the politics of this notwithstanding, can a measure like this save what's happening on the drug price front and maybe lowering prices there, make up for the real inflation we're seeing right now and reduce it?
No, I would replace what Joe Manchin said with never. This has nothing to do with inflation. First of all, the prescription drug reductions, prescription drug prices, that's going to take place over a 3-year period of time and not even kick in for about 6 months. So that's going to have nothing to do with October's CPI. Second is that I'm not saying it's a bad bill, but let's be honest with what it does and what it doesn't do. In terms of the reducing carbon emissions, look, we're basically giving people a carrot to go buy more stuff. So you can't tell me that if we make it easier to buy windows or AC or electric car, that that's somehow going to reduce inflation.
So let me ask you this, Francesca, and of course you're way too young. In fact, I don't think you were born when George Bush Sr. was talking about something like this, the idea of never taxing people ever, ever, ever. Sometimes you have to eat your own words. Let's go back to this moment words that say whether it has anything to do with this vote. Why did you call it the Inflation Reduction Act? I mean, you're not really reducing it much.
Because some of the most difficult price points that people face in their family budget are through health care, and by lowering the cost of clean energy, not only do we help families make their budgets, but we make progress on a critically even
to raise taxes, and I'll say no, and they'll push and I'll say no, and they'll push again and I'll say to them, read my lips.
Of course, that didn't turn out that way. Francesca, is this that moment for President Biden? He might sincerely believe what he's saying and hope it comes to pass, but as we've both been discussing, all of us here, it might not.
Well, now I'm going to refuse to comment on the first part of your earlier what you said. But with regards to President Biden and what's in the bill, this goes back to what I was saying before about potentially passing on costs to other consumers, other sectors. There is some concern that when you lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors, that companies could try to raise costs in other areas. But we simply do not know how all of this is going to play out yet, Neil, because many of these provisions won't kick in until 2023 or even later than that when it comes to prescription drugs. One of the earliest things that will kick in is the extension of the health care subsidies. Those are already subsidies that are in place that they'll be extended into next year, which will mainly benefit low-income Americans. There's also those rebates and tax credits for things like solar panels. Some of that stuff, again, we won't know for months what the effects will be. Secretary Granholm, the Energy Secretary, telling me yesterday that those rules are still being written in some of those areas.
All right, so too soon to tell. We'll follow very closely. Guys, I want to thank you both very, very much.